We've got minesweepers there, but I think if other friends and allies could provide capability like that, that would obviously be important.
It's, I guess, been about 2 weeks since U.S. and Israeli forces launched strikes against Iran. How do you assess the current situation there, and what do you think is the United States' ultimate objective in this campaign?
Well, let me address the second question first. I don't know what Trump's ultimate objective is. He started off by talking about regime change, but since 2 weeks ago, Saturday, he and his top advisors have listed many, many other different goals. In a sense, it's a combination of everything. Regime change would fundamentally alter the direction of Iranian policy. They hopefully would not be pursuing nuclear weapons, not supporting terrorism, not threatening their own people, not trying to close the Strait of Hormuz. And, after decades of trying, 47 years in power, the regime has proved it's not going to change. So anything less than regime change simply continues the possibility that after Iran recovers from the damage that's been done, it'll be right back to its prior unacceptable behavior. But I think Trump doesn't know in his own mind. I think that's what it comes down to. I think what we've seen in the first 2 weeks is combined offensive by the U.S. and Israel. It's been very effective in going after the targets that it set for itself. But that doesn't tell you really how close that we've gotten to regime change. The effect of the attack to eliminate a large part of the top leadership of the regime, to destroy the assets of the institutions of state power that threaten others, nuclear or terrorism, or that threaten their own people, is destroying assets the regime needs to stay in power. But it's also saying to people in the regime and to the opposition outside, look at what's happening. The regime can't defend itself. And ultimately, a government that can't defend itself is going to fall. But that means we need the opposition inside to work to find defectors, to find people in the regime willing to support the opposition, including particularly in the regular army, not the Revolutionary Guard, but the conventional military. It's not clear to me that Trump has worked with the opposition, provided them assistance, coordinated with them, strategized as to how to affect regime change. So that I think is a failure, along with the failure to make the case to the American people before the attack, make the case to Congress, and make the case to allies around the world. So these are all mistakes that Trump himself made that stand in the way of achieving the ultimate objective. Specifically now on the Strait of Hormuz, I don't understand why taking steps against the Iranian Navy and other institutions that could endanger traffic in the Gulf, or obviously in the transit through the Strait, I don't understand why that wasn't a higher priority really from the very beginning of the war. At the start of any attack like this, you have to destroy the air defenses of the target. We've obviously done that. And they wanted to go after the ballistic missiles, which were the capacity for the regime to conduct retaliatory strikes. That's fine. I agree with all that. But closing the Strait of Hormuz is a retaliatory strike too. Now it's happened, and it doesn't look like we took any measures until the past couple of days to prevent that from happening. I think it was Tuesday, CENTCOM announced that it had sunk 16 mine-laying ships in the harbor. Well, that's great. And that may mean they didn't launch any mines, but as you've seen with the hits against the ships, the fires on the two tankers in Iraqi territorial waters, it's not just the Strait of Hormuz. If Iran can make it too dangerous to transit the Gulf itself, it's the same thing. And we know they've signed contracts in the past with China for anti-ship missiles. And there are many ways you can lay mines, not just with mine layers. You can put one mine in a lot of fast boats and send 50 fast boats out. You can attach mines to drones and drop them from the drones. And we need to be thinking of all these kind of asymmetric ways you lay a minefield and make sure that they can't do it, because it's clear that reopening the strait and getting the oil flowing out to the rest of the world, and particularly Asia, where most of it goes, is a critical priority.
There were reports that U.S. and Israel have a different war aims here. Albert Colby, of course, he also said, there's a slight distinction. It seems like U.S. isn't really for regime change. Do you think they were initially for regime change, but things didn't really turn out too easy for them and they changed the objective? What do you think happened there?
I think the confusion was in Trump's own mind, but there are a lot of isolationists inside the administration who were not in favor of the war from the beginning, including Vance and many others. They didn't want to do the war. They didn't want to do regime change. They don't want to be there at all. I do think, and that's led to internal confusion. I think that's part of the problem. The disagreement, you would think the president would resolve the disagreement, but he hasn't done it. Whereas I think on the Israeli side, and really across the Israeli political spectrum, very, very widespread support for regime change.
How long do you think the conflict will go on? And you think ultimately U.S. might send in ground troops?
At the very beginning, Trump said 4 to 6 weeks. And he said 4 to 6 weeks, maybe longer. Okay, so we're 2 weeks in. in now. I mean, we've still got from Trump's own initial assessment, which may have been optimistic, as most of his assessments are. But let's say 4 to 6 weeks. We're only halfway to 4 weeks. The question of boots on the ground, it's a terminology question. I'm sure there are special operations forces on the ground now. They may not be dressed in green uniforms or camouflage uniforms, but they're there doing what they do. I think that one thing that has to be considered is not necessarily right now, but if we think the regime is about to fall, using troops to secure the nuclear sites like Fordo, Esfahan, Natanz, maybe others, to ensure that none of the enriched uranium falls into the wrong hands, none of the centrifuges, none of the other infrastructure of the nuclear program or what's in the computers or anything like that, because that information or those capabilities get into the wrong hands could be very dangerous. You may have seen there's been press speculation about going in and taking it out now. I don't think that's feasible. I don't know how they store UF6 in Iran, but here, uranium as a gas at room temperature becomes a solid, a form of crystal. We store it in 5,000-pound containers. You can't have a bunch of people go in and carry off a bunch of 5,000-pound containers. You need more logistics to do that. And I think you could do that at a moment when the regime was in collapse, because the sites, particularly Natanz and Fordo, are isolated enough that you could secure the areas and get the material out. That I think you need to consider. But in terms of assisting with the mission or regime change, no, I don't think it's necessary. In any event, it's clear Trump isn't going to do it. So if the opposition inside Iran is serious about regime change, and I think they are, they're going to have to carry a lot of the burden. There's no doubt about it. That's why defections from the regime, particularly the regular army, are so important. The Revolutionary Guard does what its name implies. They guard the Ayatollahs and the concept of the Islamic Revolution. The regular military, is carefully watched by the Revolutionary Guard, but it's a different organization. And if you add all the different components, the Revolutionary Guard has roughly 200,000 men, and the regular army has 800,000 men. It's very important for the opposition to get elements of the army on their side, so that they're not totally defenseless in front of the Revolutionary Guard.
It seems like what he's doing now in terms of foreign intervention is not particularly viewed favorably by the so-called MAGA camp. You think this would affect going into the sort of midterm season?
It could have an effect. It's a lot of the MAGA base, really, that's isolationist. I mean, this is why it's a problem peculiar to Trump. But the Democrats look like they're going to be largely opposed to it. I think it's a knee-jerk reaction on their part. It may not be good politics for Trump, but their reaction isn't good politics for them. Things like the price of gasoline at the pump are going to be important, which is another reason I don't understand why the White House didn't anticipate this at the beginning and be ready to counteract it more effectively. But there's still a long way to go, and I think if price of gasoline comes back down, if we can reopen the Strait of Hormuz, the markets calm down, then I think it will not be the issue it looks like it is right now. This is due to Trump not preparing the country for it to begin with. He's starting with polls showing support for the war at the lowest level since World War II. And since support for a war often goes down, you want to start at the highest possible place, and he didn't do that.
Those of us in East Asia, those who support President Trump's action, not just in Iran, but also in Venezuela earlier, suggest that ultimately this is to sort of pressure and squeeze China further. Do you think this is part of the objective, is to do that?
I think the inevitable consequence is to squeeze China. This is a rough number. I'm sure you can find the figure, but 80 to 90% of the oil coming from the Persian Gulf countries goes to East Asia. Of that, a third, 40% or more, goes to China. So if you cut that off, I know the rest goes to Japan, South Korea, Taiwan, among other places, but it puts China in a difficult position. Unfortunately, it benefits Russia, because now, especially that Trump has lifted the sanctions on Russia, I think for 30 days. This allows Russia to sell at market prices, and they've got oil. It's not like they have to pump a lot more. They've got plenty of capacity. They couldn't sell all the oil they could pump, even at prices well below the world market. So China will undoubtedly buy everything in Russia that it can, put it on whatever ship it can find, and get it to China. India, Pakistan will probably do the same, and they'll buy whatever they can and fill their storage tanks as much as they can until the sanctions are put back on. It gives the Kremlin an enormous revenue boost, maybe only temporary, but it's money they hadn't counted on before that they can use in the war against Ukraine.
President Trump is expected to visit Beijing late this month and early in April. Do you think this situation would impact the dynamic of the summit?
There's reporting in this country that the White House preparations for the summit are in total disarray. That doesn't surprise me, except that I thought for a long time the key deliverable Trump wanted out of this summit was the biggest trade deal in history. I mean, he pursued that with China in the first term. He didn't get it. Got a smaller trade deal. The Chinese didn't comply with their commitments to purchase agricultural products. They certainly didn't reform any of their unfair trade practices. But this quest for the biggest trade deal in history was always on Trump's mind. My prediction was he would try and deliver it on his second trip to China during his presidency. I don't see how they can do that. So if that's not possible, and we've got 2.5 weeks to go, and I just don't see how they make a deal. They can announce they've got a deal, of course, whether they have one or not, but in fact there's no way they can have this deal. So you add that to a lack of preparation on anything else, lack of other priorities. It seems to me what's happening right now fills the void, and that's all they talk about. I do think that if Trump stays the course, what's happening in Iran combined with what happened in Venezuela will be much on Xi Jinping's mind, because it means Venezuela is not complete in my view. I mean, I think we've captured Maduro, but the regime's still there. I think we could get the rest of the regime out. Trump doesn't seem to want to do it, but we certainly could do it. And I think watching Iran, Xi Jinping is going to be very worried for what that means about him. And I hope that something can be done to show that the commitment to Taiwan is strong. I think the risk of Trump giving something away on Taiwan to get the biggest trade deal in history is now much reduced, but never completely gone. So that still remains to be worried. So I guess what I'd say is they may have conversations about a lot of things, but I don't see anything significant coming out of this meeting. Maybe both of them wanted that, but I just don't see what it is at this point.
There are concerns, of course, that President Trump might leverage the situation in Taiwan in his negotiations with President Xi, but that you said would be less likely at this point.
I think because they're nowhere close to a deal, giving something away on Taiwan wouldn't benefit Trump. I mean, I don't think it's because he cares that much about Taiwan's security, unfortunately. It's not a point that would be much at issue. Xi Jinping, I think, always thinks about Taiwan, so he may come up with something new and surprise Trump with it at the summit. You can't discount that, but I think probably at this point, there's so much going on inside China we can't fully understand, like the purge of the military and what all that's going to mean. And Trump obviously has political difficulties in Washington, so it may be that the two of them just think, look, we want to show we're stable, in control, everything's fine, and not do anything that might disrupt the summit. That would mean a summit without much substantive accomplishment, but it would be a good show, and that may be the best they can get out of it, and it may be what ultimately both of them want.
With Washington just increasingly focused on the Middle East and other regions at this point, do you think the United States might be distracted and not particularly committed to Northeast Asia, particularly in terms of Japan and South Korea as strongest allies in East Asia?
You know, with Trump, you never can tell what he's going to be concerned about, but I do think he has good relations with the leaders of both South Korea and Japan in particular. I think really attributable to Shinzo Abe, since Takaichi is a mentee of Abe's, according to all the press reports. And I think even though he's diverted, the rest of the country isn't diverted, and I think the relationship with Japan is still at a very, very strong point. It's good with Korea, what Japan and South Korea are doing in terms of agreeing to three-way military maneuvers that were agreed in the Biden administration, still continuing is good. I think the emphasis on Taiwan is growing even in South Korea. So by and large, I don't think it represents a political shift away. I do think that just because of the rate of expenditure of weapons in Ukraine and Iran, the awareness has grown in the United States. We've just got to do more to have our stockpiles increased, so we're better able in more places. And I think it also suggests, just as Trump has pushed the Europeans to spend more on defense within NATO, looking at people in East Asia, allies and friends, and really all around China's the arc through the Indo-Pacific, spending more on defense makes sense. That's what Japan previously committed to, recommitted under the new prime minister. So I think this is a sign that's going to be necessary, and I think it would be very beneficial for Japan to show that it's making these significant increases in defense spending. It would be a good thing for the prime minister to be able to say to Trump.
If the war in Iran is prolonged, do you think there's a possibility that the United States might ask more direct engagement from Japan?
Well, I think it's possible, yeah. And I think logistics and minesweepers are going to be particularly important, because I think if the regime isn't overthrown, the threat to the Strait of Hormuz and the Gulf is going to continue. The British had a minesweeper in the Gulf, and it just went home a couple of weeks ago. So we got minesweepers there, but I think if other friendly friends and allies could provide capability like that, that would obviously be important. And, I think it would allow Japan to say, because we depend on the oil from the Persian Gulf, we do want to be a participant in making sure that there's a safe and secure supply.